Hey, welcome back. Today we are going to be discussing this project here, which is the second version of possibly a trifecta version. There might be another one coming that I am going to try, but this basically allows you to run a scooter input shaft in your Hobbit transmission, so you can run a scooter clutch, so you can move the clutch to the rear instead of having it up on the flywheel. So yeah, without much further ado, let's kind of get close in here, and I'll show you what I've found and what needs to be done for this version, and then what the next version is hopefully going to look like, which should allow most people with access to a basic lathe to make 3 pieces and buy 2 different kits, and you should be able to actually replicate this whole setup. Won't be cheap, because you're basically buying a scooter primary gear set, and then you'll also be buying your like Malossi Hobbit primary gear set. So yeah, it's not exactly the cheapest route to go, but the end result is you end up with something that allows you to run pretty much any Piaggio scooter clutch on the market. So let's jump into it. So starting with the gear sets, this is a Stage 6 gear set. The only requirements I had for it, I didn't really care what the other mating gear was for it, was that it was 13 teeth. And the reason that is because this here is a Malossi gear set, this little gear, or this big gear here, from Treatland, that has a 13-35 gear set. And originally what I was going to do was buy this and then make this gear. But what I found was that the metric module of the tooth profile on both of these is actually the same, and it's the gears mesh fine, and not only that, they have the proper amount of backlash. So when they're both in their home, you can actually just take half of this Malossi kit and not use the Malossi input shaft, and then buy a Stage 6 Piaggio input shaft and modify it. Now, my third version of this that I'm going to try, I've already bought the gear, or I bought another one of these just to see. I'll get into that a little bit later, but there is another one where hopefully the modifications might just be like taking a lathe, shaving these gears down a little bit, and then making a third piece that kind of goes in here. We'll get into that later. So yeah, so on this guy, this gear stack is a little wider, and that needs to be machined down for clearance for this fella. So when this goes in here, if you don't shave the gear down, it'll crash into the big output gear. So that is one thing that has to be taken into consideration, is that the gear does need to be shaved down a hair. Other than that, this is not a... Now, because this is now just transplanted in there, the only other height consideration you have to take is like the total distance from here to this flange. So you just have to measure that on your like stock or your Malossi gear set and try and get your press to end up being from that height to there, because it does allow for a little bit of float. If you make it too tall, then your cases probably won't go together, but you do need to accommodate for a slight amount of float. And then that just supports the inboard, and then also on these Piaggio ones, they come with an outboard steady mount. Normally there's a retention clip there. I'll have to try and find the Piaggio part number for it. And it goes in there and goes in the bearing, keeps it from rattling. It's a pretty nice little clip. So, but as you can see, that all meshes up and works pretty good. So this bearing is a 17 by 32 by 8. It is pretty common for a non-standard size bearing. I have found them on the internet. And then the seal is a 17 by 22 by 5, it looks like. Might be 6. Yeah, 6. So both of those just fit in the housing. You don't need to do anything extra. This input shaft is 17 here. And like I mentioned, on this version I made it so that it had a spacer, so it spaced the gear up properly. But in hindsight, there's a few other ways we can tackle that, and we'll talk about that for version 3. The only other thing that I do to these, and I know Treatland sells a version of this, I just make my own version, is you need to do a pedal delete because you're not going to be able to run your pedal lockout. So mine is keyed and fits on there, but Treatland sells a version that works just the same. Yeah, it all goes together, runs pretty nice. So it's pretty good, and you end up with like a small amount of backlash in the gear, which you need. So it's got pretty good engagement on the pitch line. So for version 3, these are my thoughts. And like I said, I did order another one of these shafts because after I had done this, I was like, well, hang on a sec. There's probably like an even easier way to do this. So thing number 1 I would probably do differently is I'd get rid of the spacer, because you can make this thicker by 2 millimeters. I had to turn this down a bit to clear here, but you could just leave that extra length on this side, and I don't think there would be too much of an issue. It might move the output shaft out a little bit too far, but it might be okay. It's tough to say, really, without kind of doing some dry fitting. So this had a bearing surface that was about this diameter, not the 10 millimeter size. I'm guessing that's probably like 12 or 11 mil journal. So my thoughts for version 3 would be to just turn a cup, extract this bearing, which will be a pain in the butt because it's basically in there flush, but get that bearing out of there, and then make a cup that just sticks out with enough clearance on the side that it clears this cup. And then you could just actually put the whole Stage 6 input shaft in there, with maybe the only modification needing to be done is just turning the gear teeth down an amount to clear the main gear, which on a standard lathe would be pretty easy to do, and you wouldn't really have to worry too much about like doing like press fits and precision alignment and all that stuff and boring stuff out, because that's what I did with this, is like drilled it out and then bored it and then had to make a decent press fit in there, so, and then worrying about heights and stuff like that. So that way you could just make one external cup that went in here. You could get rid of this, and then the only other part that you would need to machine really would be your plug for your pedal lockout. And that's with buying the Stage 6 kit and then this Malossi Hobbit gear set. And that's not to say that you need to use a Stage 6 kit. You could probably also use a Malossi. The big thing is as long as it has the 13 teeth, because that's what this kit is looking for. And I can't say definitively that a Malossi one would work, but it probably will. I would assume it would be fine, but either way. So I'm just gonna go push this input shaft in over on the press. I'll be right back. One other thing of note is if you are turning this, you're probably going to have a bad time if you're trying to do it with high-speed steel. It's case hardened, although it is fairly hard the whole way through. The outer case harden on this is incredibly hard, like shooting sparks kind of hard kind of thing, especially with that interrupted cut. So it is a bit of a nuisance to turn this down. It is possible. I just highly recommend getting a piece of carbide, and it will turn. But so that's the input shaft pushed in with the spacer on the bottom, and then the whole case can go together. like so, and you can see it meshes up real nice. And then for good measure, we'll just slide this stack on here. Oh, my bell housing spacer fell out. And boom, there you go. So I wouldn't recommend running this without using some type of external stabilizer as well. It's a lot of weight, and that little 10mm bearing that's used as like a steady pad on the inside is probably not load rated for the amount of heft you're going to be hanging off of this. Also, the Hobbit shaft is like half the length, so some sort of outboard bearing stabilizer is highly recommended. Treatland sells one that probably can be modified with a few washers here and there to work with this. But just something outboard that has a bearing that can sit on this stub, keep everything good. And yeah, that's pretty much it. That's kind of the whole kit and caboodle. And I do have another requested video that I'm hopefully going to release soon, which is the Piaggio cranksets in Hobbit cases. Those actually are within 20 thou of each other, and the bearing journals are the same, and the diameters are really close. So I have some cases here that I've modified already to accept one, so I'm going to dig those out and hopefully release that here shortly as well, so people can get silly and make cool stuff. That's pretty much it for me for this one. Until next time, take care.